So I was watching this video on Facebook that really bothered me, and what it featured was like there's this little girl who was afraid of monsters, and what happened was that it says that she actually called 911 and had three police officers come to her house and report that there are no monsters under her bed. And there's a lot of things I want to talk about with this video that, I do understand that sometimes with children, we want them to feel comfortable, or sometimes when they have like natural fears, we want people to go out of their way to help them out. Or I remember, like, the other day I was working at a hospital, there was this patient with dementia, and she was accusing, like, somebody of taking her bag. So there was a bunch of police officers just playing along to make her feel comfortable. So I do understand why people do that, to just not use harshness, because sometimes when you use too much harshness, you actually create a situation where you can create further problems. The other thing is that there's also a situation where, like I call overaccommodation. And what overaccommodation means is that you make other people go out of their way to deal with a certain situation. I mean, and this is absolutely petty. I remember, like, when my little brother was younger, he would always trash his room, make it really, really messy. And there was a song on Barney and Friends called Clean Everybody, Clean If You Care, Clean Everybody, Do Your Share. So what that meant was that if we were around, like the older brothers, we would have to help clean up his mess, because it would encourage him to clean as well, really. Instead of being like, you know what, you made the mess and nobody's going to pick up after you, really. Like, why should I clean up something that you messed up, really? So sometimes, part of the accommodation culture is making other people sacrifice for somebody else, or it's also, in a way, inconveniencing other people, really. So, in this video, there's a bunch of issues. That, number one, that there are parents, and this has happened many times, there are a bunch of parents who have issues with children, misbehaving or having some fears or whatever. So they call 911. And they may say, oh, the cops are going to take you away, or, oh, can you pretend to arrest my child because they're misbehaving? So some people have gotten arrested for that, and rightfully so, because that's misuse of 911, really. What would happen if somebody's being raped? What would happen if there's a murder? What would happen if there's an armed robbery and all that stuff, is going on, really? What would happen if there's a pit bull attacking, like, a bunch of kids, really? Oh, well, that gets put on the back burner because people don't know how to parent their kids anymore. People don't know how to use that belt. Or people just, try to, like, scare them with police officers. And then the other thing about it is, this thing that I'm talking about, like, where 3 or 4 police officers are going out of their way to look at, to see there's monsters under her bed to make her feel comfortable. And while we all understand it's a cute little kid, maybe these guys are fathers and everything like that, it's still like, like taking them away from a real job. Like I said, what would happen if there was, again, a bunch of pit bulls, or German shepherds, going angry, and they were, like, attacking people. These guys were held up, and they could have been there like 20 minutes early if they didn't have to deal with this kid's, just fear of monsters under the bed, really. Or what would happen if there was a robbery or whatever, and somebody's life could have been saved if they were there early, but they got held up because, this little girl is being afraid of, like, monsters and whatever. So we have to kind of be really mindful of that as well, really, because, we do live in a culture, in my opinions, of over-accommodation, really. Definitely with my daughter, that would not fly, really. And, maybe on one side, if they wanted to call 911 so badly, or they tried to call 911, part of me would want to spank them and teach them that you don't dial 911 for stupid things like monsters under the bed, really. You would say, okay, if there's a fire, if somebody's sick, or if I tell you to call 911, or if somebody's in danger, that's when you call 911. Monsters under the bed is something that parents take care of. And because you got to teach them also not to have a misuse of 911, really. Because it's going to be just like the Powerpuff Girls in that episode where everybody calls them, like to open a jar of pickles, or or another thing too is that some old people actually call 911 because they're lonely and whatever. And while it's nice to help them out, it's misuse of 911 really. So it does teach, what we see a lot of in the society of over accommodation. But like I always said, she's a girl and she's white. If this was a black boy and they had like a black mom, let's say she's ratchety single mother, like let's say the stereotype type, they'd probably arrest the mom and arrest the kid as well, really. So it's always interesting, like the white privilege side of it, and that's true that it's out there. They would probably not go their way if this was a black child in that situation, really. But like I've said, and the big important thing is that's misuse of 911. You should even teach your kids when it comes to monsters, parents deal with that, not police officers, because otherwise you're going to teach them that they can call 911 over everything. Next thing you know, they may have a disagreement with you. You may take away their phone if they get punished, and you're like, oh, they're going to call 911 to get their phone back, say that's theft. Or, oh, well, you know what, they want somebody to play catch with them. Or I'm going to call 911 really. Then it gets to a point where you're doing way too much over accommodation and all that stuff. So, 911 needs to be for 911 services only, really. If you over accommodate people, it will create situations where people will just run amok with it. It's 911. It's not it's 911. It's not parents 411 or something like that.